I was really young when I was first introduced to Dragon Ball. I must have been about 8, 7, 8, 9 years old. Maybe even younger. I was first introduced to the world of Dragon Ball when my cousin was visiting. And with him, he brought his PlayStation 2. And he had a copy of Dragon Ball Z, Budokai Tenkaichi 3. And that was my entry point. I became familiar with Dragon Ball by a video game, a video game that was created several years after the end of the original series syndication. And almost immediately, I don't know, it was just a random game that my cousin brought. My cousin, he liked Dragon Ball, but I think it was more so just like a casual interest. But when I was introduced to Dragon Ball through BT3, I was, as a young child, really enamored by the character designs. I was enamored by the concept of people, aliens, of different skin tones and designs, of varying power levels, and of character and personality. All of these different individuals coming together, clashing with one another at full speeds. And it wasn't long before I also got a PS2. I didn't grow up particularly well off, but I had a kind of beaten up PS2. And eventually I got my own copy of Dragon Ball Z BT3. And I got to experience the story for the first time through its story mode. I got to kind of get the quote-unquote Sparks Notes version of the story, kind of a reduced, made-for-video games adaptation of the storyline. It wasn't until several years later that I would become more intimately familiar with the story, the characters, the plot points, the overarching themes of Dragon Ball. But as a kid, I was just fascinated. I was intrigued. And some of my fondest memories are just, sitting in front of like my PlayStation 2, just playing Dragon Ball Z BT3, and not even really, playing the game, but just scrolling through the character select screen with its 147 characters. I believe that's the figure. 147 characters, including all of the various transformations for all of the characters. I would just scroll through and look at their designs one by one. Who the heck is Bojack? Who the heck is Broly? Garlic Jr.? I don't know who these people are. Of course, I would come to know who they are later. They were Dragon Ball movie villains. But at the time, they were just characters. I remember being really confused by Baby Vegeta, because I knew Vegeta was like Goku's rival. At least I could glean that much from playing the story mode, and how Vegeta and Goku would interact at several points. But then, like when I heard about Baby Vegeta, and he's not even a baby, he's just Vegeta with like a tank top and white hair and red streaks across his face. I was very confused. So I had a very, very rudimentary, almost distorted entry into the Dragon Ball series. But for me, it was good enough. I was a kid. I loved it, and it really inspired me to try drawing. I started drawing and practicing creation, any type of creation, storytelling. Thanks to Dragon Ball. I was really fascinated by the designs, as I mentioned, and I wanted to have the full trilogy of Budokai Tenkaichi games. In fact, I just wanted a bunch of different Dragon Ball games. Again, like it would be a long time before I got to truly experience the series. And the next game that I got was Budokai Tenkaichi 2. because Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is the first game that I knew of, so automatically I would ask for it. I didn't go in order. So the next game I got was Budokai Tenkaichi 2. And then, of course, after I'd finished playing through everything in Budokai Tenkaichi 2, I asked for Budokai Tenkaichi 1, which I actually never got. I actually never got to play the original Budokai Tenkaichi. But when I played Budokai Tenkaichi 2, I was a bit older now. I was starting to learn more about the characters. At this point, we had a computer that I got to, use and read up about Dragon Ball and all of these characters. And at this point, I think people were really spreading misinformation regarding a continuation of the Dragon Ball series, Dragon Ball AF. And I was hooked. I got hooked on Dragon Ball. It motivated me to start drawing, and I started drawing. I would spend so much time not even, again, playing the game. I would just have Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi running, and I would just look at the character designs, and I would just draw. The character that I remember spending the most time drawing was Super Buu, the villain, or one of the forms for the villain of the final arc in the original manga. And it was a drawing that I was super proud of, and it really made me want to keep drawing. I wanted to draw even more. I wanted to draw my own comics, my own manga. Another thing that really motivated me to really pursue drawing and really just cemented my status as a Dragon Ball fan was, of course, as I said, just getting to read so much stuff about Dragon Ball online. Another thing that I got to experience was fan manga, which is part of what inspired me to really try to create something of my own, a Dragon Ball story that I made. Wow. And the Dragon Ball fan manga that I came across, and it still runs today, is Dragon Ball Multiverse. In retrospect, the fan manga has a bit of issues, but it's something that I've been following ever since I was a kid. And this might sound like some sunk cost fallacy type of issue, or a matter of nostalgia, but I genuinely enjoy reading it. I think the artwork is great. And again, it just, this sounds really messed up. It's such a strange introduction to the world of Dragon Ball. And then as I was reading more and more about Dragon Ball and, its adaptations, the original manga that I had never really gotten to read at that point, I was 11 years old. That's when I first heard the name Akira Toriyama. And this one guy who lived on the other side of the world was responsible for just all of these wonderful things that I was watching, these things that I was, getting to interact with through video games. He inspired me to try to create something of my own too. I would try to make Dragon Ball fan comics on MS Paint. I remember I was really inspired by all of these animations I saw on YouTube, and it made me want to create one of my own so that I could be recognized and I could contribute to the pantheon of Dragon Ball media, both official and fan created out there. And my first fan comic was obviously very immature. The story was just such a blatant ripoff of fan manga that already existed. But I had fun doing it. It was something that I really wanted to do. And again, throughout all of this, my love for drawing never stopped. I'm not a professional artist by any means, but I think I can draw. And I would have never started drawing if it wasn't for Dragon Ball, if it wasn't for the influence of Akira Toriyama. And this is a really spur of the moment thing that I'm doing right here. I didn't really plan anything out. I know I've been gone a while, and I'm not proud of that. But I felt, you know, Toriyama has been such an insanely influential figure on my life. When I did eventually get to read his manga, it was something else. His technique, the way in which he has panels lead in, segue in such a organic fashion from one to the other. His artwork, oh my gosh, his artwork, of course, that's this type of art style that I utilized for several years when I started drawing, and that to this day I still kind of struggle to get away from. Toriyama was infamously the type of writer that planned out story beats by the seat of his pants. Seldom was there anything within the plot of Dragon Ball that was pre-planned. But yet, if we are to believe that completely, it's a miracle that Dragon Ball turned out the way it did. There are so many things that just work so well within the world, and his propensity for just creating a fascinating world, for adding more and more otherworldly, sci-fi inspired story elements, nothing ever really seemed out of place. It just all worked. I was one of those kids that would go out and try to shoot kamehamehas. I was one of those kids that would, like do a bit of a squat, flex my arms outward, and, start yelling and hoping that I could go blonde and become a Super Saiyan. I wanted to be like Goku when I was a kid. And even to this day, Goku is still my favorite Dragon Ball character. Sure, I know Vegeta has an interesting character arc, as does Piccolo. Of course, people love their anti-heroes. But there's just something about Goku's purity. And not only that, but his status as a flawed character. In modern times, I think, that discourse has really run its course. People can become a bit tribalistic about it. Especially considering how Goku is depicted in Super, both the anime and the manga. But nonetheless, I really enjoy Goku as a character. Call me tasteless, call me basic, whatever. I love Goku. I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for Toriyama Akira. I should be saying his name properly. I don't even know if I would have even aspired to try to create my own stories if I wasn't introduced to Dragon Ball. I often like to rant about the current state of Dragon Ball with my girlfriend. She puts up with it a lot. um, but I rant because it's just a series that like I've grown up with and that has been such a huge part of my life. I'm going to be turning 24 years old in like a month. And Dragon Ball has been around for more than like 75% of my life. I might have gotten the math wrong, but it just feels like it's been a part of my life forever. It effectively has. I don't really know what I'm accomplishing by doing this. I don't know if I should even, I don't know. It might be a bit embarrassing to put this out there, but I was very impulsive when I hit record. I heard the news about Toriyama Sensei's passing almost immediately. And it's such a huge loss. I read that what he passed away from, acute subdural hematoma, generally arises as a result of head injury. And it builds up blood across the surface of the brain, which can, lead to pressure. I'm not a medical professional by any means. This is from a very, very amateurish, cursory understanding of what he passed away from, what made him pass away. He was 68 years old. He passed away at the beginning of this month, March 1st. Is it even right for me to be doing this? I never even met him. I'm really just speaking about my own feelings. It comes across as a bit selfish. It feels very selfish. And I started off this whole spiel by talking about how I was introduced to Dragon Ball. And I guess, like, in a way, it could almost be, like, self-aggrandizing. I'm just talking about how, like, somebody dies, and I have an excuse to talk about, how that person has helped me develop as a person, as an artist, as a reader, as a creative, so on and so forth. It's a bit insensitive, isn't it? And I personally don't... I don't cry when it comes to celebrities or influential figures passing away. I can sympathize with it because, it's another human being that is lost. It's another human being, another talented soul, that is just no longer around. The most amount of grief that I ever felt before this was when Monty passed away while he was working on Ruby. Again, I never met Monty but he was incredible. I loved his animations, his fight choreography. I have a tendency to imagine fight choreography of my own in my head, and I don't have the technical skill to, as of now, I don't have the technical skill to realize these things that I like to imagine in my head. Just for fun, like, if I'm driving or if I'm walking, if I'm listening to music, whatever. I like fight scenes. Fight scenes are cool. Fight choreography is cool. Montium inspired me in that regard. And I was really enjoying Ruby. As a 14-year-old, I was still pretty critical of Ruby around the time it was airing, but I still really enjoyed it. And I was particularly moved by his death. And my biggest creative undertaking, Stark's Mind, would likely not exist without Toriyama. Toriyama inspired so much within my life. Toriyama sensei inspired a lot of my creative faculties, inspired a lot of my interests, and as it turns out, a lot of the other things that I was interested in would usually be directly or indirectly inspired by the works of Toriyama sensei. His works that I had seen and the works that I had not seen. I I could have been smarter about this and put together something that was more well composed, that had an actual through line in which I could pay proper tribute to a talented, wonderful, albeit admittedly somewhat problematic, creative. Um, it's impossible to ignore some of the more controversial things that Toriyama has done, like Mr. Popo's design in Dragon Ball, or Lady Red, or his involvement, or him being implicated in it's either the Panama or Paradise Papers, one of the two. Um, which honestly kind of added to the mythology of Toriyama. It's just this guy that has a affinity for wearing tracksuits, so much so that he would add it to like characters in later modern day Dragon Ball. Who would forget the names and transformations of his own characters. Who didn't even know where the hell his story was going, like, as he wrote it out and drew it. The guy that based a tyrannical overlord that was proclaimed as the, dominator of the known galaxy or universe. No, dominator's from One Punch Man. The emperor of the known universe. I believe that's the term. He based Frieza off of his is it his editor? He either based him off of his editor or a landlord. Again, like, there's just so much mythology to Toriyama that just makes it such a riot to read about him. But he was an incredible artist. And his storytelling skills, his ability to weave things together so seamlessly, on a whim, it seemed almost effortless. His methods of including humor in his serious works, how he could do something so ridiculous, like make the what's the proper term? The entity responsible for ensuring or determining which dead souls go to heaven or hell. Kind of pulling back the curtain and, just making this entity like a guy in a suit, and, the process in which people are sent to heaven or hell is a bureaucratized business. Like, it's unimaginable. And I'm just talking about everything he did with Dragon Ball. He's done so much for video games. His designs were used for Dragon Quest as well as other video games. Chrono Trigger. He's cited as a constant inspiration for several other insanely popular manga. He inspired the big three: Bleach, Naruto, and One Piece. Even modern shonen manga like My Hero Academia. His DNA is in so many things today that he's an ingrained part of popular culture. I'm really gonna miss him. Rest in peace, Toriyama.